In the rotunda, Bullfinch left room for 8 huge murals of scenes from American history. Now, at this point, America didn't have a great deal of history, but its leaders felt that historical paintings in the grand manner would have an improving effect upon future generations. And only one man seemed right for the job: Bullfinch's friend, a pompous, irritable, deeply patriotic, and moderately gifted artist called John-Trumbull. Congress commissioned him to paint 4 moments from the American Revolution, and he finished the job in 1826.
They are large, and what inspiration they have is spread fairly thin. Competent and worthy are the words that spring to mind, I guess. 2 were political: George Washington resigning his military commission, and, most famous of all, the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which a sceptical congressman, irked no doubt by Trumbull's huge fee of $32,000 and objecting, as congressmen still do, to the spending of government money on the arts, called the Great Shin Piece because of its forest of 18th century calves. Not all Americans in the 1830s felt so secure about the future. Arcadian America was passing, but what was coming? The fear of decline began to nag at the edges of American consciousness, and one of the men who gave it memorable form was a transplanted Englishman, Thomas Cole, who produced a cycle of 5 paintings as a warning about the rise and fall of civilization. He called it The Course of Empire. The first phase he called the savage state, primitive hunter-gatherer culture in the wild. The next phase is Virgilian, the birth of religion and the arts. The Stonehenge-like temple with smoke rising from its altar, the grazing of flocks, an equivalent may be to Jefferson's ideal of a nation of yeoman farmers, an agrarian republic. This is the social balance, the Eden, that Cole feared was threatened by impending political events. For in 1829, America's 7th president was sworn in on the steps of Bullfinch's Capitol. His name was Andrew Jackson, Old Hickory, a rabble-rousing populist Democrat from the Indian-killing frontiers. And he put the fear of God into the establishment, including Cole's patrons, who viewed him as a potential dictator.
The lessons of what can go wrong with the state unfold in the 3rd painting, which Cole called The Consummation of Empire. No more the agrarian virtues of Jefferson's republic. Instead, populism has created mob rule, and the mob has thrown up a dictator who gives them a culture of spectacle and excess. And, in triumph across the bridge, here comes Caesar, followed by his train of subservient intellectuals and bought senators. Cole didn't actually give him Andrew Jackson's face, but he didn't feel he needed to because he thought the moral would be clear enough. There is something rather pretty about Cole's version of the awful delights of imperial Rome. No orgies. But he clearly had a great time doing the architecture of this marzipan city, column by column. In its nutty grandiosity and bathroom-like newness, it looks forward to Cecil B. DeMille. And he hints at what is coming. Those little children have learnt about aggression. They're staging a naval battle in the marble pool, and a boat is sinking.
So when they grow up, these bellicose little beasts bring down stage 4, destruction. The empire is corrupt. It has fallen to the barbarians amid scenes of rape and pillage and mayhem under a stormy sky. Cole's viewers at the time would have thought of Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, and perhaps of the English burning Washington.
And now history cycles back to its beginning, a wilderness with ruins. To me, this is the best painting of the 5, and in it, Cole is trying to convey the scepticism of Edward Gibbon through the language of Claude Lorraine. But the anxiety that he expresses is very American too. It's going to turn up at intervals all the way through American history, and especially much later in the Cold War. It's the fear that this culture, so new, so strong and shiny, can nevertheless be swept away in one catastrophic eye blink. Except, of course, that for Cole, the threat wasn't nuclear, it was moral.
This is not the primal landscape of the first America, full of possibility, an innocent slate upon which anything can be written. But its exhaustion may be the prelude to rebirth, another cycle. We don't know, and Cole doesn't tell us. But that image of the ruined column, seen from where we are now, becomes a haunting prelude to the end of America's own mounting moral crises in the 19th century, which would explode in the Civil War between the industrial North and the slave-owning South. This is Oak Alley Plantation in Louisiana, and it reminds you of how the most extreme uses of architecture as a fantasy about classical civilization were being created here in the Deep South. Everyone who's seen Gone with the Wind knows the idiom: white pillars, avenues of ancient trees. Now, ancient Athenians didn't live on this scale, but industries like King Cotton created tremendous wealth. And since these planters believed their true model was the slave-owning elite of ancient Athens, they built as they felt the Greeks would have done if they'd had the luck to be born Americans. Despite its belief in preserving an aristocratic way of life, the slave South between 1800 and the Civil War produced nothing in the way of painting or sculpture that could compare with the achievements of the North. It was the songs of the slaves that would create a new American music by laying the deep roots of the blues and of jazz. But in the visual fabric of the master's life, there was no ferment. It was provincial and gracious, but not inventive. Stagnancy was built into Southern culture in all areas except architecture. There, the longing for a classical past still functions as a powerful image of nostalgia. Understandably, I guess, most Americans visiting the great antebellum houses prefer not to think too much about the atrocious system that put them there. The black bodies under the white columns don't show up in the restorations.
Yet Charles Dahlgren, who built Dunleith House in Natchez in Mississippi as his town residence in the 1850s, didn't feel that he had anything to hide. Like all his fellow planters on the eve of the Civil War, he was completely convinced of the immutable rightness of slavery and of what it brought them. This place isn't a mask for anything. In places like this, I think of William Yeats's lines on the great country houses of Ireland, which run, "Some vile and bitter man, some powerful man, brought architect and artist in, that they, bitter and violent men, might raise in stone the sweetness all had longed for night and day, the gentleness that none had ever known."
This was once a colossal plantation house near Jackson, Mississippi, burnt to the ground in the Civil War in 1864. An American pastrum, worthy of Piranesi, or perhaps of Thomas Cole. The end of empire, and also maybe the end of the Jeffersonian belief in classical architecture as the sign of democracy. Americans would go on to build millions of classical columns, north and south, but none would have quite the purity of meaning they had once possessed when the Republic was new.
Visit American Visions at PBS Online and further explore the American experience through art at the address on your screen. Visit